Hey guys, tonight we slip beneath the surface not just of a lake, but of history itself. Imagine the water so still it mirrors the sky, except underneath that calm blue skin is a whole world that used to breathe. Streets, markets, houses, schools, all swallowed silent, perfectly preserved like a memory you're not sure you dreamed. You hover over the rippling surface, and you swear you can see rooftops just below, like ghost towns pressing against a thin glass pane. These are the ancient villages submerged underwater in China. And no, you probably won't survive this, not because it's dangerous, but because it's impossible to process the scale of what was sacrificed for steel light and power. Thousands of years of human life gently flooded in the name of progress. And now it's quiet. Almost too quiet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these sleepy stories reach. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your journey at the edge of a lake that didn't used to be there. It's big, stretched out over miles. At first glance, it looks natural, like a tranquil getaway spot where city folks might rent paddle boats and sip tea on the docks. But something feels too still. The way the hills slope off into the water without a shore. The shape of trees that seem oddly spaced, like they were once lining a road that no longer exists. You squint, and below the jade-coloured surface, you notice a faint grid pattern. Streets. You step closer. The water ripples outward, lazily lapping at your boots. Somewhere down there, entire towns are resting. Not ruins, not broken stone walls or scattered pottery, actual towns. Intact. With their roofs still tiled courtyards, still paved doorways still waiting to be opened. And these aren't obscure hamlets from folklore. Many of these towns had bustling markets and rich histories going back to the Ming dynasty, some even older. What's underneath isn't forgotten, it was forcibly paused. Put into suspension so China could have more power, electrical, not political, well, maybe a bit of both. You're standing at the edge of Qiandao Lake, also called Thousand Island Lake. Sounds romantic, right? Like something from a travel brochure. It's man-made, created in 1959 when the valley was flooded to make way for the Shinhan River Dam. A reservoir, technically, but so big and beautiful that people started calling it a lake to feel better about what was lost. Underneath this manufactured paradise, about 27 villages, 2 ancient towns, and over 1,300 smaller settlements. That's not a typo. Thousands of years of civilization drowned in a matter of days. Xiqing is the crown jewel. Known as the Lion City, it was founded nearly 1,300 years ago during the Eastern Han Dynasty. Once a political and economic hub, Xiqing had ornate gates, towering stone walls, and archways adorned with carvings of dragons and phoenixes. Today, it rests beneath 131 feet of water, perfectly preserved. Like Pompeii, but without the fire and ash, just silence and silt. And you know what's wild? For decades, no one talked about it. It wasn't until the 2000s that divers began rediscovering these ghost towns. The government hadn't really publicised what was submerged. You get the feeling they didn't want too many questions. Now you hover above, where city gates once opened and alleys buzzed with merchants and chatter. Somewhere down there is a school where kids once memorised Confucian texts, a temple where incense spiralled into the rafters, and a blacksmith shop still containing tools, rusting peacefully in the dark. Mainstream historians have confirmed this much. The flooding displaced over 290,000 people. Homes were torn down, graves relocated, and entire ancestral lines severed from the land they called home. Some families had lived in these towns for dozens of generations. Imagine packing up everything you own, not because of war or famine, but because your entire town is about to be turned into a fish tank. There are stories from villagers who remember being told the water would come in 2 weeks, and by the 6th day, the roads were already disappearing under the tide. People moved higher, watching their childhood homes vanish brick by brick, wave by wave. No time to mourn, just move. And the spooky part, some say you can still hear things underwater. Fishermen talk of strange currents, sudden fogs, even bells tolling when there's no wind and no boat nearby. Locals don't joke about it. They say the city sleeps, but it hasn't forgotten. Chill stuff. Sweet dreams. While mainstream history confirms the displacement fringe, theories have blossomed like algae. Some claim the government used the flooding as a way to erase controversial relics temples dedicated to old sects or underground meeting places from rebellion eras. One writer even floated the idea that precious jade burial sites were accidentally left to be buried. Convenient, huh? Historians still argue whether the loss of these submerged towns was a justifiable price for modernization. Some call it a cultural catastrophe. Others say, look, we needed the power grid. Sorry about your grandma's ancestral courtyard. But let's pause and appreciate how weird it is that the architecture didn't rot. Normally, you think water shy decay, but the sediment temperature and stillness of the reservoir created a near-perfect preservation chamber. Carvings on walls remain legible. Roof tiles haven't slipped. You could practically move back in, assuming you bring scuba gear and don't mind the occasional eel roommate. You imagine diving in, just you, the bubbles, and a flashlight. The first thing you'd see is an ornate archway still proud after centuries. You'd pass stone lions, their faces eroded, but still noble like bouncers at a party that ended 50 years ago. And here's a quirky detail: no fish swim into the buildings. For whatever reason, instinct like bad, vibes the local aquatic life tends to avoid interiors. Divers say it's unnerving, like the fish know these spaces aren't theirs. You continue gliding over the lake. A group of tourists laughs behind you on a ferry, snapping selfies with the sun at just the right angle. They don't know or don't care that right beneath them lies a city with its own heroes, its own weddings, its own petty squabbles over market stalls. The water shimmers. A cloud passes. And for a moment you swear the shadow on the lake's surface looks like a tiled roof with a small chimney. A trick of the light maybe. Or maybe something deeper is surfacing, just to say hello. You're still standing at the edge of that mirror-smooth lake, but now the shimmer shifts, and your gaze turns upstream toward the true origin of this aquatic graveyard. The water didn't appear here by magic or rainfall. It was called, channeled, compelled. It began with a single structure, a behemoth engineered not just to tame nature but to conquer it. And tonight you're going to walk through its shadow. The Three Gorges Dam is the kind of thing you can see from space, literally. It's the largest hydroelectric power station in the world. Not the second, not one of the largest, the largest. And China built it like they were playing SimCity on God mode. Concrete steel, more concrete, more steel enough to make even a mountain feel small. You begin your mental stroll near the base of the dam. It towers over you like some slumbering mechanical dragon, all silent turbines and humming cables. You can feel it through your shoes, deep, low-frequency vibrations that pulse like the heartbeat of a mechanical colossus. This dam doesn't just hold back water, it holds back entire histories. You stare up at its brutal geometry, wondering how much of China's past got bulldozed and buried to make this happen. And here's the kicker. It wasn't just this one lake that got created. The Three Gorges Dam displaced over 1.3 million people. That's not a rounding error. That's more than the population of several countries. Entire cities were relocated. Some were rebuilt Frankenstein style in higher regions. Others just weren't. The dam itself stretches more than 2.3 kilometers across the Yangtze River. When the final gate slammed shut in the early 2000s, water levels surged. Ancient towns upstream, some dating back to the Han Dynasty, found themselves slowly drowning street by street, doorstep by doorstep. Like watching a candle melt in reverse, the wax rising, not falling. And here's a mainstream historical fact to blow your mind: over 13 cities, 140 towns, and 1 to 300 villages were affected by the dam's reservoir. That's not poetic exaggeration. That's what the official numbers say. Imagine you're a kid in one of those towns. One day you're riding your bike to a noodle shop. Next year you're waving goodbye to your school as it disappears beneath the rising waters. Childhood submerged. The decision to flood so much history didn't come lightly, or at least that's what officials claimed. Planning for the dams started as early as the 1910s, but political turmoil and wars delayed the project until the 1990s. When it finally launched, it wasn't just about electricity. It was a national symbol, an embodiment of control, of taming the mighty Yangtze, a river that had long flooded, unpredictably killing millions over the centuries. But like every massive plan, there were consequences, and not just environmental ones. The ancient city of Fengdu, often referred to as the Ghost City, was partially submerged. This place wasn't just called that because of legends. It was literally a spiritual site, a gateway between the world of the living and the dead in Taoist mythology. And yes, of course, the flooding didn't touch the modern part of Fengdu, just the spiritual bits. Convenient, huh? Some say that the ghosts still roam above the water, especially at dusk when the river turns red with the setting sun. Boats turn their lights on early around that area. Not because they're scared, of course. Definitely not because of that. You wander further, tracing power lines and concrete columns, and you begin to realize the scale of the thing. It generates over 100 terawatt hours of electricity per year. That's enough to power a small country, or keep your phone charged for about 73 million years depending on your screen time. But at what cost? Here's a quirky tidbit: during the dam's construction, engineers actually had to blow up entire mountains. Not metaphorically, actual mountains. Flattened chunk by chunk to reroute the flow of water and make room for the dam's infrastructure. One worker called it shaping the bones of the earth, which sounds poetic until you realize it was also a nice way of saying obliterating sacred land. And that's the thing. You can't build something this massive without ghosts. Not just of the people who once lived here, but of the places themselves. The temples that no longer echo with prayer. The markets where no one haggles. The bridges that now span between nothing and nowhere. Historians still argue whether the Three Gorges Dam was a triumph of engineering or a cultural tragedy. On paper, yes, it reduced flooding. It boosted economic development. It improved navigation. But on the underside of that glossy presentation are entire towns erased, generations scattered, shrines submerged. And as you drift, your foot brushes something. You glance down, a faded signpost half buried in silt, its characters still barely legible. It once pointed to a tea house that sat by the river. You imagine elders sipping jasmine tea, discussing weather and poetry. Now it's tea for the fish, and the elders are living in high-rise resettlement blocks, far from their ancestral roots. You keep moving. The concrete shifts into earth, then into water again. The reservoir's surface glints under moonlight, an eerie stillness that covers so much violence. You try to imagine what it sounded like when the flood came. Did the buildings groan as the water crept up their walls? Did birds scream as their nests vanished? Did someone pause to weep before their front door became an underwater ruin? A few engineers years later admitted to guilt, quietly in interviews that were buried in technical journals. One even wrote, "We built a dam and erased 1,000 scrolls of living memory." That stuck with you. And there's another strange little wrinkle: in some places the water is too deep for divers to explore the ruins. These aren't clear, shallow lakes. Some areas are over 100 meters deep, cold and dark and utterly inaccessible, which means that right now, this very second, there are entire libraries, ancestral halls, statues and relics that no one has seen since the flood. No photos, no videos, just vanished. That hasn't stopped rumors, of course. Some believe there are imperial treasures hidden beneath the water, secret stashes left by fleeing nobles centuries ago. Theories range from jade burial suits to forbidden scrolls. Divers occasionally report glimpses of strange patterns on the lake floor. One even claimed to have seen an enormous bronze bell half buried in silt, but when they returned it was gone. Either they imagined it, or someone got there first. The government does run expeditions occasionally, but they're secretive. You won't find much public footage, just the occasional blurry sonar image or a diver's breathless comment in a magazine. It's like the city just paused. So now standing once again at the edge of the dam's enormous reservoir, you feel a strange kind of ache. Not the sadness of something dying, but of something forgotten. Not just history erased, but history repressed. Like a dream you were told not to remember. The dam hums on, lights blink, power flows to tens of millions of homes. But deep beneath its glossy PR and shimmering water, something stirs. Cities that once laughed, prayed, argued, and celebrated still rest below, waiting, remembering. The surface of the water shifts again just barely, a whisper of wind, a wrinkle in the glass. And now you're drifting not just over villages lost to hydroelectric ambition, but over something even older, something no one meant to flood. No dam required, no forced relocation, just time tectonics and the slow smothering power of nature itself. You're floating above Luoyang, or what remains of it. This is no shiny government-planned reservoir. This is a mystery soaked in mud older than most of the world's cities. Located in Zhejiang province, Luoyang was once a prosperous settlement during the Tang and Song dynasties, a place bustling with artisans and scholars, boatmen and monks. And now it's under Longtan Lake, drowned sometime during the Yuan dynasty, when shifting climate and rising water tables took the town under inch by inch. You close your eyes and try to imagine it an accidental Atlantis. One day there's a call to prayer at the temple. The next, a strange dampness seeps into people's sandals. Days pass. The river doesn't recede. It creeps in, steady, relentless. No announcements, no rescue plans, just a quiet rising dread. Quiet. They say the rain didn't stop for 3 weeks. Farmers tried to dig trenches to redirect the flow. Merchants boarded up their shops. But the water kept coming. Locals carved marks into doorways to track the rising flood like growth charts. Except instead of children getting taller, it was the end getting closer. Historians still argue whether it was rainfall, an earthquake, or upstream logging that did it in. Maybe all three. The precise cause lost like the town itself. But in the 1980s, a team of amateur divers stumbled upon stone bridges, ceramic tiles, and submerged stairways beneath Longtan Lake. Since then, the area's been a quiet obsession for fringe historians and ghost story enthusiasts alike. Here's your mainstream fact. Chinese archaeologists have since confirmed the remains of buildings and road systems at the lake's floor. Intact roof beams, stone-lined wells, even a Buddhist shrine with carvings so well preserved the moss growing over them still trace the contours of lotus petals. Now here's your quirky fringe tidbit. Some divers swear there's a stone dragon resting at the bottom of Longtan Lake. Not a sculpture, an actual fossil, they say. Or maybe a statue too big to be moved, buried so deep in silt, it feels more like a mountain. One diver described it as curled like it's asleep, which is probably fine, and definitely not the beginning of a horror movie. Still, the government hasn't officially explored it. Probably too expensive. Or, maybe they're afraid it really is sleeping. You chuckle. A little. Then glance nervously at the water. You picture walking through Luoyang in its final days. Water pooling in alleys. Boats moored to second-story balconies. Lanterns floating down streets like fireflies. People whispering prayers and rumors. The river is angry. The mountain is leaking. Someone offended the spirits. When logic fails, superstition thrives. And then, one morning, silence. No footsteps. No voices. Just birds circling overhead and the lapping of water against abandoned homes. That's how Luoyang ended, not with an explosion, but with erosion. You walk the lake's edge now, not quite sure what's real anymore. Every ripple seems to mask a roof tile. Every shadow might be an archway. And then you see it, a circle of stones breaking the surface, perfectly spaced, deliberate, like the rim of an old well or the outline of a kiln. The past trying to breathe. Local legend says that once every 60 years the moon aligns with the lake and you can see Luoyang's rooftops shimmering through the water at dawn. people bring offerings, rice cakes, incense, tiny paper boats. Not to raise the town, just to let it know it's remembered. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of it. But make no mistake, this was a real place. With laundry lines, rice pots, family squabbles. And now it's a cautionary tale buried beneath lotus leaves. You move on, and the landscape changes. The forest thickens. Another lake looms, this one, in Anhui province, where rumors swirl about a village that sank without warning during the Qing dynasty. No records, no explanations. Just a name Shihei and scattered references in regional poetry about the sunken house of mirrors and bubbles rising where no fish swim. No one knows if it was real. That's the frustrating thing about oral history. It preserves the feeling, not the facts. But villagers in nearby areas still avoid swimming in that part of the lake. The water remembers, they say. You reach a quiet cove. A boy and his grandfather are fishing nearby. You ask gently if they've heard stories of the village. The old man doesn't look up. He just nods. Yes. My father said the roofs poked out of the water for weeks before they vanished. And that's all he says. It strikes you that these places, Luoyan Sihe, even Shicheng, aren't just underwater towns. They're grief frozen in place. Not everyone died, but something died in each person who had to leave. The rhythm of a town, the smell of the bakery, the angle of sunlight through a favorite window. When water comes, it doesn't just take structures. It takes ritual. And here's another debate. Some historians believe these towns might resurface one day, especially with shifting climate patterns and falling water levels. But others argue they should be left alone, that unburying them would disturb whatever fragile peace they've found beneath the silt. You aren't sure which side you're on. You just know that silence has weight, and these lakes are heavy. It's getting late now. The light is fading and the lake turns from jade to black. Somewhere an owl calls, and you stand very still, listening for echoes that may not come. Then faintly you hear it, a bell, just once, soft, far away. But definitely a bell. You don't move, not at first. That single bell note lingers in the air like a memory or a dare. It didn't come from the trees. It wasn't a bird call or some trick of your overworked imagination. No, you heard it. You felt it vibrating through your ribs, subtle and hollow, like the kind of sound that echoes down empty hallways, or out from under the surface of ancient water. You turn your attention to Qiandao Lake, literally Lake of 1,000 Islands. It's beautiful, impossibly beautiful. If you Googled peaceful getaway, you'd probably get this. Jade green waters, mist-draped hills, little pine-covered islets that pop up like stepping stones laid out by giants. Boats glide lazily between them like koi fish in a koi pond. Tourists snap selfies. Influencers pose with oversized sunglasses. But none of them are thinking about what's directly beneath their paddle boats. Because beneath this lake lies Xicheng, the Lion City. Built nearly 400 years ago during the Eastern Han Dynasty, Xicheng was once the political and economic hub of the region. 5 impressive gates, intricately carved archways, watchtowers, schools, shrines, stone lions, of course. It was named for them. Then, in 1959, the Chinese government decided to build the Xinan River Dam to generate hydroelectric power. Same old story. Same bitter ending. The Lion City was flooded to create Qiandao Lake. That lake you're staring at right now. The one that looks like paradise. It's built on bones. But here's the thing. Xicheng wasn't lost. Not like Luoyan. It was drowned on purpose, sure, but not forgotten. Not completely. In the early 2000s, divers stumbled on something incredible. Because the water is deep and still, and because the flooding was relatively recent and controlled, the entire city was perfectly preserved like a bug in amber. Wooden doors still latched, carvings still crisp, roof tiles still snug in their rows. Time paused. It's your mainstream fact of the night Xicheng now sits under 30 to 40 meters of water, nearly intact. You could swim through its avenues if you had the gear and the nerve and the fringe tidbit. In some corners of the diving community, people whisper about hearing voices underwater near Shichang. Not mechanical noises, not radio feedback. Voices, chanting. Some say it's monks from the old temples. Others say it's the memory of the town trying to finish a ceremony that was interrupted by the rising tide. Most likely it's just bubbles and brain chemistry. Probably. Still, the government declared the area off-limits for casual diving, officially for safety. Unofficially, well, let's just say you don't want influencers doing TikToks with submerged Buddha heads. You picture yourself swimming down into the silence. The sun disappears after 10 meters. Your flashlight clicks on. A doorway. Stone walls covered in algae. A staircase leading nowhere. Then paint. Faded red ink on the lintel. You don't recognize the characters, but the lines are sure and bold, like whoever wrote them meant it. Shicheng was big, over 60 football fields wide, with more than 250 archways still standing. That's not some tiny hamlet. That's a full-fledged city sleeping beneath your sandals. A ghost metropolis. Historians still argue whether the town should ever be brought back to the surface, if it even can be. There's the technical hurdle, sure, but also the ethical one. Does the past belong in a museum, or does it have the right to rest in peace? There's something else too. A weird little detail. Some of the carvings at Shicheng include non-local motifs. That means either wandering craftsmen from other regions helped build it, or the city was more culturally mixed than historians assumed. A stone relief of a figure with oddly Western features. A floral pattern that doesn't match any native Chinese style. It's like discovering Roman graffiti in a Mayan temple. Weird and thrilling. You drift on the imaginary current carrying you over rooftops and alleyways. If you listen closely, you swear you can hear the clatter of wooden sandals, the bark of a street vendor, the distant clang of a blacksmith's forge. You're not haunted, just remembering something you've never seen. As your gaze pans out across the lake, the so-called Thousand Islands glimmer like teeth in a smile. But what most tourists don't realize is that these islands used to be mountaintops. Before the dam, this whole area was valleys, hills, villages. When they filled the reservoir, all the lower parts went under. The high ground stayed dry, and suddenly poof islands. It's kind of a magician's trick. Distract with sparkle. Hide the loss behind it. And while you're on quirky things, one of these islands is nicknamed Snake Island. Because, well, you can guess. No one really lives on it. Probably because you know snakes. But also, some say it's cursed. Supposedly, it was once home to a shrine that was never relocated before the flood. Locals still avoid looking in its direction after sunset, just in case. You picture the city. At the moment, it disappeared. Engineers said it took a few days to fully flood, but locals remember it differently. One woman who was 10 at the time swears the city gasped her word as the water rushed in. She said it sounded like breathing, then silence. That silence still hangs here, not oppressive, just respectful. You feel like a guest, and not one invited to poke around. Still, curiosity wins. You imagine dropping down into one of Shicheng's underwater towers. Inside, scrolls sealed in waterproof clay, an abacus abandoned mid-calculation, maybe even a diary still legible under glass. Not treasure in the golden jewel sense, but something rarer, continuity. Proof that someone once lived and loved and fought and joked right here, under this now serene lake. You run your fingers through the water and feel nothing but cold. Yet part of you wants to apologize for intruding, for not remembering sooner. And maybe that's what this journey really is. A slow remembering of what lies beneath beauty, of what progress often costs. Because Shicheng may have disappeared from the maps, but it never really left. Not entirely. It's just waiting, quietly, patiently, beneath the Thousand Islands. You breathe in slow, steady, as if matching the rhythm of the lake itself. The water stretches on glassy and endless, and somewhere beneath it, the submerged streets of Shicheng still hold their breath. But you're drifting further now, letting the current of thought and memory carry you westward. The terrain grows rougher, mountainous. You've entered Guizhou province, a land of cliffs and canyons, where the rivers carve deep gorges like ancient runes across the stone. Here the past hides, not just beneath water, but behind mist and superstition. And the village you're about to visit, well, it's one that technically shouldn't exist anymore. Its name is Shaimankan, and while it wasn't flooded by a dam or submerged by accident like Luoyang, it was almost erased by water politics and the slow forgetting that comes when something is left off every map for just long enough. Shimenkan was once a remote missionary settlement founded in the late 19th century by a group of Miao Christians and an eccentric British preacher named Samuel Pollard. The village became a haven for education, cross-cultural exchange, and for some reason, an inordinate number of stone staircases. Pollard, who lived barefoot most of the time and spoke fluent Miao, helped invent a script for the language that's still in use today. A quirky highland utopia, basically, until the river came for it. But not all at once. The Wu River, which curls through this region like a sleeping dragon, had always been temperamental. Locals respected it, feared it, even gave it names like the Grey Serpent and Mother's Tongue. But in the 1950s, logging upstream changed the runoff patterns. Entire hillsides were stripped bare, and with them went the ability of the soil to drink up rain. You can probably guess what happened next. Historians still argue whether the resulting landslides and floods were purely natural, or whether mismanagement played a larger role. Some even say government geologists warned against logging in the region, warnings that were ignored. In 1961, the waters rose too fast for anyone to react. Whole terraces collapsed, livestock disappeared, and one morning Shimenkan was gone. Not completely underwater, but scattered in pieces along the banks and swallowed by mud flows. What remained wasn't a village, it was rubble. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The original church school building Pollard helped build was rediscovered in 1999, mostly intact, buried under meters of sediment. Inside, fragments of books, pages of handwritten lessons, a child's slate still scratched with multiplication tables. Now for your fringe tidbit. Some say Pollard's original Bible is still out there preserved in a waterproof case beneath a rock shelf. A few old villagers claim it glows on the anniversary of his death. Others say it's guarded by a dragonfly the size of a dinner plate. That's probably just poetic license, or a mosquito problem. Still, the idea that an entire philosophy language learning prayer got buried by a river feels haunting. Not because it's spooky, but because it's familiar. How many stories have you lost just because someone didn't write them down, or because the paper didn't survive the rain? You climb a narrow trail above where the village once was. The air is thick with pine sap and memory. No signs, no fences. Just a few crumbling steps and the edge of an old courtyard now carpeted in moss. You imagine kids playing here, chasing wooden tops. Pollard barefoot arguing with a visiting magistrate about taxes. A wedding procession with flutes and ribbons. Now, only wind. Locals occasionally venture here to pay respects, but most avoid it. It's not haunted, one elder insists, just lonely. Which honestly feels worse. From your perch, you can see the river that took it. It looks calm today. Innocent, almost. Like a dog wagging its tail after tearing up your favorite shoes. And yet you can't stay mad at it. Water does what water does. It moves. It remembers. It reclaims. There's an open scholarly debate over how many other micro-villages like Shimenkan may have been lost to erosion, deforestation and rising rivers. Some estimate over 3,000 since 1949. Others say that's an exaggeration. But then again, how do you count what isn't on a map? As you descend, you pass an old milestone. Carved into stone, its characters worn almost flat. But if you squint, you can make out a date. 1903. That's the year Pollard opened the school. You reach out and brush your fingers over it. It feels warm. Or maybe your hand is just cold. Further down the trail forks, and one path leads directly into the overgrowth. You take it, of course. And after a few minutes of careful stepping, you stumble upon the remnants of a stone arch half collapsed, overtaken by ivy. You duck under, and find yourself in what must have been the village square. You can still see the layout. A large rectangular footprint where the chapel stood. A long corridor, probably the dormitory. Beyond it, a circular well choked with leaves, but intact. It's a ghost town without ghosts, just memory. And moss. You sit for a while, letting the silence do its thing. The birds chirp. The breeze picks up. A single pine cone falls with a thump. And you get that feeling again that you're being watched. Not by eyes, just by the past. The Meow people who once called this place home still tell stories of it. Not just about Pollard and his strange ways, but about the time the river spoke. That's how they described the 1961 flood. The river spoke. It said no. To arrogance. To carelessness. To the illusion of permanence. And they're not wrong. That's what water does best. It reminds you that nothing is permanent. Not walls, not languages, not even whole towns. You stand stretch and start back. The arch feels smaller on the way out. Or maybe you've grown. Either way, as you rejoin the trail, you look back one more time. A shimmer of light catches on something metallic. Maybe a hinge, maybe a nail, maybe just your imagination. But it's enough. You follow the sound of rushing water now, not thunderous or angry, but constant. Like it's been flowing for 1,000 years and only just realized you're here to notice. Your boots crunch along a gravel path that used to be an old trade road. No signs mark it anymore. No donkeys, no carts, just you. But the feeling sticks. This was once important. The air grows more humid as you descend into a basin that feels almost too quiet. The forest parts, and there it is, Kowloon Village, or what little remains of it above the surface. This isn't one of the flashy submerged cities that makes headlines or gets documentary teams buzzing with underwater cameras. No, Kowloon is barely remembered, a tiny riverside settlement in the depths of Sichuan province that got eaten slowly by a creeping reservoir built in the 1970s. Not dramatic, not immediate, just slow and hungry. Your mainstream fact of the night China constructed over 80,000 reservoirs in the 20th century. Think about that. 80,000. Many were essential, controlling floods, generating power, irrigating crops. But each one came with a price tag. And not just in dollars. In Kowloon's case, it was homes. Ancestral graves. A centuries-old Taoist shrine. And a peculiar stone mural that still draws debate to this day. Historians still argue whether that mural carved into the cliff just above the current waterline depicts an ancient flood myth or a real event. The figures are strangely proportioned, long limbs, exaggerated, mouths, eyes that seem too knowing. At the center, a woman with hair like cascading waves holding back a swirling tide. Some scholars think she's Nuwa, the legendary goddess who patched the sky. Others insist she's a local deity, a river witch, whose story was never recorded, just passed down in lullabies and warnings. Locals called the carving the lady who waits. And according to the last family who lived here before the flooding, she was crying the night they left. You walk along the path where her feet would be now submerged under a few feet of reservoir water. A toad hops by undisturbed. The water laps against the rock gently, like it's trying to forget how to be angry. You see, Kowloon didn't vanish in a single season. The water rose gradually like a bathtub that someone forgot to turn off. One spring the gardens were soggy. The next year rooftops peeked out like puzzle pieces in a pond. By the third year, the village was gone, except for the mural. She watched the whole thing one stone tear at a time. And now here's your fringe tidbit. A group of visiting archaeologists once tried to take a rubbing of the mural, only to find that their paper turned damp and unreadable within minutes, despite perfect weather. Local guides shrugged and said, "She doesn't like being copied." You circle the remaining structures, which are mostly foundations now. A few stone steps lead into nothing. A crumbling wall supports a flowering vine that's clearly outlived its planter. Every so often, something glints in the sunlight, broken ceramic, melted glass, a whole story reduced to fragments. But the quiet is rich. It's not the absence of noise. It's the presence of memory. You step into what might have been a courtyard. The layout suggests a shared cooking space. There's a large, flat stone blackened at its center. You crouch down, feel it with your palm. It's still warm from the sun, but maybe it remembers fire. Laughter. A grandmother scolding someone for burning the rice. You imagine the last night before the evacuation. Lanterns dim, clothes packed tight, chickens squawking, children clinging to carved wooden toys. The mural staring as if to say, "You were warned." Because there's a whispering fear in towns like Kowloon that the water isn't just physical. That once it takes something, it also erodes the stories that lived there. That people stop telling them. That names fade. That the mural becomes a curiosity rather than a warning. But not tonight. Tonight you remember. A crow calls overhead. You flinch, mildly startled, but then roll your eyes at yourself. You're fine. It's just a bird. Probably. Then again, some local legends say the lady who waits sends birds ahead to find travelers who can still see her. People she wants to show something. Or maybe warn. You're not sure which one you are yet. As you rise, your eyes catch something just below the waterline, a submerged door frame. Perfectly rectangular. The top just visible. And on its lintel, carvings. You wade in slightly, the cool water biting at your ankles. The carvings are simple but elegant. Waves, fish, and a pair of sandals. Probably symbolic, but it almost looks like someone just left them there. You don't stay long. The sun is dipping lower. The mural glows faintly orange now, her features softer, less stern. For a moment she looks almost relieved, like someone showed up after all these years just to see her. There's a scholarly rumour, totally unconfirmed, that a burial vault lies beneath Kowloon, hidden in a limestone shelf that the flooding made inaccessible. Supposedly, it holds scrolls passed down by travelling monks during the Ming dynasty, tucked away in waterproof clay tubes. Or maybe it's just a cave full of wet bats. But as you climb back up the trail, part of you hopes it's true. Because if Kowloon has one more secret to tell, maybe it'll find the right person to tell it to. You reach the crest again. Look back. The mural is barely visible now, half shadowed by trees. But you swear her eyes are still open. You keep moving. You descend a winding path through bamboo forest now, each stalk swaying gently, brushing against your shoulders like curious fingers. A low mist clings to the ground, curling around your ankles, rising with a patient hush like breath through a cracked window. The further you go, the cooler it gets. The trees thin. And suddenly the world opens up into a sunken valley that feels completely forgotten. Welcome to what's left of Longhu village, or as some call it, the Drowned Dragon. You wouldn't find it on a map unless someone whispered it to you. And even then, you'd need patience, a little luck, and a stomach for damp staircases. The village, nestled in what used to be a bowl of soft hills, was quietly overtaken by the construction of a hydroelectric tunnel project in the early 1980s. Unlike the grand flooding of the Yangtze Basin, this wasn't a massive surge. Longhu was the casualty of seepage, a slow bleed from beneath, like the earth decided it didn't feel like holding together anymore. Your mainstream historical fact. From the 1950s through the early 2000s, China's water infrastructure programs displaced over 23 million people, the largest human resettlement due to development in modern history. Not all were forcibly removed. Many were given notice assistance and new housing. But others, like the people of Longhu, they simply left, quietly, when the floors went soggy and the wells went foul. Longhu's final residents say it wasn't the flooding that drove them out, but the feeling that the ground itself no longer trusted them. They'd wait to find water where there had been earth the day before, not puddles, not leaks. Whole patches of village just damp and sinking. Doors wouldn't close, chickens wouldn't walk in certain places. Historians still argue whether the engineering surveys done before the hydro tunnel project were flawed, or whether the village was simply built on an unfortunate fault line. Some say engineers knew about the risks, but dismissed them as minor. Others claim strange underground springs were disturbed ones that had been dormant for centuries. Then there's the fringe theory that the village was protected by a sleeping dragon, a long ridge of stone beneath the valley, believed to be the spine of a celestial beast. The drilling woke it, and the water that came afterward was the dragon's way of reclaiming its body. You stand now at the edge of what was once the village centre. You wouldn't know it unless someone pointed out the half-submerged rice-husking platform, now crumbling into a shallow pool. Stone benches lean sideways. Red-painted doorways lean against nothing. The water here doesn't rush, it seeps. Quietly, persistently, like it has nowhere else to be. There's an eerie beauty to it. Lily pads drift where carpets used to hang. Fish flick between old stairwells. You tiptoe around the edge of an abandoned ancestral hall, its eaves draped with lichen. Inside, faded portraits stare down from above, cracked altars, their eyes half-lidded in eternal disinterest, or maybe polite disappointment. You find an old cup still sitting beside one offering bowl like someone meant to come back for tea and just forgot. There's a stairwell nearby leading down into the earth. Curiosity wins. You descend hand on the wall. It's slick with condensation. The stairs become colder with each step. At the bottom is a flooded chamber, some kind of grain cellar, now a tiny underground pond. In the water you spot something that looks like a scroll tube, or a stick. You decide not to reach in. You're brave, but not Scroll of the Drowned Ghost brave. Back above the air shifts. The mist lifts just slightly, revealing more of the sunken rooftops. You walk along what remains of a cobbled path, its stones loose and uneven. You step carefully, but even so, one tilts beneath your foot, sending a startled frog leaping from a crack. You mutter an apology. The frog doesn't answer. It's said that the last person to leave Longhu, an elderly woman named Yao Mei, refused to go until her front door floated. Not the threshold, not the walls. The actual door with its rusted lionhead knocker. She sat on the roof, sipping broth, waiting for the moment it would bob free. When it did, she nodded, tied her belongings to a wooden shutter, and drifted away like a leaf. Whether that's true or just local embellishment, no one's sure. But her house. You see it now, partially submerged, the knocker still visible just below the waterline. You crouch beside it. It's warm to the touch, strangely. Probably the sun. Probably. You wonder what it must feel like to know your home is dissolving beneath you, but to still stay. To live in a place that's slowly returning to nature, not all at once, but inch by soggy inch. You find a stone tablet nearby lying flat, where it once stood tall. On it, barely legible characters carved into its face. Here is the resting place of silence. May the dragon sleep again. The script is a mix of local dialect and formal Mandarin. It gives you a small chill. And just like that, the sun begins to dip below the ridge. Shadows grow long. The mist thickens once more, not heavy or cold, just present. It wraps around you like a soft towel, urging you onward. Before you leave, you look back one last time. The rooftops are now just outlines. The lily pads cluster in tighter groups, almost forming a circle. Somewhere beneath them lies the center of the village, where children used to run barefoot, chasing kites made of reed paper. Now only the wind plays here. There's an open scholarly debate about how many villages like Longhu exist beneath China's wetlands, and artificial lakes, unmarked, unmapped, unsung. Thousands, maybe. Tens of thousands if you count the ones too small to have ever been formally registered. It's a quiet legacy, one that doesn't make headlines, but still matters. Because even if no one builds a monument for Longhu, you've walked through it now. You've seen the door, felt the mist, heard the frogs, and somewhere in the water, maybe the dragon stirs. Or maybe it sleeps. Either way, you tip your head respectfully toward the valley and whisper a good night, and then you keep moving. You wake from your daze. Not that you were asleep, just caught in that quiet in-between state where the line between memory and present softens like mist on your skin. Your legs ache a little, but it's a good ache. The kind that says you've wandered somewhere real. Now the trail grows rough again. Uneven stones and bent tree roots threaten to trip you, but you keep your balance. The air smells different, damp and mineral rich. You hear a distant roar, not of crowds, but of falling water echoing off cliffs like laughter from another time. You've arrived at the edge of Heishui Gorge. The name means black water, which sounds ominous because it is. Below you lies the drowned remnants of a Song dynasty trading village once called Chenjiapu. You wouldn't guess that by looking. From this height, you only see the dark churning water broken by jagged rocks and foam. But beneath that surface lies what once was a bustling mountain outpost famous for its lacquered goods dyed silks, and what one trader once described as the best fire tofu I've ever had. And I've eaten a lot of tofu. A ringing endorsement. Your mainstream historical fact for tonight. During the Song dynasty from 960 to 1279, CE internal trade routes in China flourished, supported by river barges and mountain caravans that connected even remote settlements like Chenjiapu to major markets. It was one of the most commercially vibrant times in Chinese history, especially for inland towns sitting along strategic crossroads. Chenjiapu was one such hub, wedged into the cliffs, hugging a river bend like a barnacle. That made it profitable. It also made it vulnerable. As modern hydropower ambitions swept through the region in the late 1990s, the gorge was deemed ideal for damming. The river was slow to rise here, but when it did, it swallowed the village in less than a year. Some locals managed to move their ancestors' bones uphill. Others weren't so lucky. Historians still argue whether Chenjiapu was fully documented before its flooding. The state archives say yes, but independent researchers claim entire structures were lost without survey, including a cliffside observatory rumoured to have housed star charts dating back to the Northern Song period. They say those records were carved into limestone, not paper etched to survive the centuries. Unfortunately, not the flood. You descend now on a steep set of switchbacks, stone steps slick with moss and thyme. Below the water churns black and glossy, true to the gorge's name. You reach a narrow landing, a pocket of earth where grass still grows. There's a bench, modern weirdly out of place, but welcome. You sit. To your left, just under the surface, you spot roof tiles clustered like fish scales. You lean closer. They shimmer as the water shifts. It's mesmerizing. A row of submerged eaves stretches along the shore, and for a moment it looks like the village is still there, just sleeping under glass. A guide once claimed that during severe droughts, the upper floors of Chenjiapu's granary reappear wooden beams rising like ribs from the dark. But not tonight. Tonight, the river's hungry and high. Only hints remain. You find a strange object half buried in the mud, a round disc, maybe ceramic, maybe stone. You brush it off. It's a Song coin with a square hole in the center. You run your finger along the edge. It's smooth from years in the water. Still legible, though. It reads Yuanfeng Tongbao. That's circa 1078. Just sitting there like loose, changed the river, forgot. Here's your fringe tidbit for this leg of the journey. Divers once reported seeing lanterns still hanging in some of the submerged homes. Glass unbroken frames intact, their red paint faded to soft pink. One diver even claimed a lantern flickered as if responding to his flashlight. He quit diving the next day, now sells fruit in the next province over. You decide not to test that theory. Besides, you're more interested in the whispers the gorge carries. The wind here moves in tight curls like it's wrapping around memories. Locals say you can sometimes hear market sounds in the roar of the river, bargaining voices, goats braying, children playing with bamboo hoops. You listen, and maybe you do hear something. Then just as quickly it's gone, replaced by the steady drone of the current. A reminder that nature's version of erasure is never harsh. It's patient, relentless. Like the water here, there's a half-submerged trail that winds off to the side, once part of an old pilgrim's route. You follow it, boots squelching. A broken milestone marker reads, "To the shrine, 420 steps." You're not counting. You just keep walking, trusting your feet to do the math. The shrine, or what remains of it, is tucked under a rocky overhang, safe from full submersion, but weather-worn. Inside, the deity is gone. Only the base of the statue remains. Someone's painted fresh red ribbons along the railing, though, which means people still come, still remember, still believe. That's the thing about these places. They're not gone. They're changed. Hidden beneath the surface, yes, but not erased. As long as someone remembers a name, lights a candle, drops a coin, the village still breathes. Just differently. You leave a coin on the altar base, not the ancient one that one's in your pocket, now warming like a little ember. You leave a modern coin, one minted this year, a gift from now to then. And as you climb back up the gorge behind you, swallows the last light of day. It doesn't feel hostile, just full of water, full of stories, full of silence that once was sound. Historians might keep arguing over what was lost here, but you felt it, walked through the memory of it, and that counts for something. As you crest the ridge, the path ahead splits again. One trail bends toward a forest that hums with night insects. The other climbs toward higher cliffs, where another drowned village waits. You don't hesitate. You keep going. Your steps fall softer now, muffled by pine needles and worn earth. The elevation is rising. You can feel it in your lungs and in the slight pull in your calves. The air here is thinner, crisper, and it tastes faintly of iron and rain. You pause to take it in. Somewhere far below, the black waters of Haishui Gorge still churn. But up here, the world quiets. It listens. Ahead, jutting like a jagged tooth from the forested cliffside, are the ruins of Wansho village. Its name meant longevity, which in hindsight is kind of ironic. The buildings cling to the edge of the escarpment like stubborn barn swallows, all narrow terraces and stone walls laced with roots. The trees around them have started to reclaim their domain, with branches curling through broken windows and vines climbing ancient hearths. But Wansho doesn't feel ruined so much as paused, caught mid-breath. Wansho was famous not for size or trade, but for its mountain temple school founded in the late Ming dynasty. Young men from wealthy families across several provinces made the long trek here to study Taoist philosophy, medicine, and oddly wind instrument performance. Apparently, a young Confucian gentleman needed to know how to meditate, diagnose a kidney imbalance, and play the vertical bamboo flute all in the same semester. Your mainstream historical fact. In the Ming period, 1368-1644, mountain monasteries like Wansho's were not just places of worship, but critical intellectual hubs, especially for the fusion of Taoist, Confucian, and folk traditions. These sites preserved old herbal compendiums, rituals, and even early meteorological notes, cloud charts etched into temple walls. You brush aside a curtain of ivy and enter what remains of the lecture hall. The beams above your head are split from age but still strong. Faded characters line the walls in brushwork you can barely decipher. One reads, "The wind teaches more than the tongue." You let that roll around in your head for a moment. It feels right somehow. Then there's the debate. Historians still argue whether Wansho's final abandonment in the 1980s was due to natural landslides or governmental neglect following hydro construction reroutes. Some claim a planned retention pond below the village destabilized the southern cliffs. Others say it was bureaucratic. Someone forgot to reassign funding after the temple school was decommissioned. Either way, once the teachers left, the students stopped coming. And when the water supply grew erratic, so did the remaining villagers. You step carefully through what was once a dormitory. Wooden bunks line the walls, stripped bare. In one corner, a trunk sits half open, filled with scroll tubes. You gently lift one only to find it packed with sticks. Thin bamboo slats. Not scrolls at all. Just leftover calligraphy practice, blanks used and forgotten. Still they hum faintly in your hand, like they remember being touched by eager ink-stained fingers. Outside the dorm, a stone courtyard opens to the sky. In its centre is a circular well, now dry, its mouth covered with a grate of rusted iron. Locals believe the well whispers at dawn, but only to those who sleep within earshot. You consider lying down beside it just to see, but maybe later. You're not ready to nap. Not yet. And here comes your fringe tidbit. One of Wansho's more mysterious legacies is a wind tunnel built into the side of the cliff. Locals say it was designed to capture mountain breezes and direct them through narrow flutes carved into the stone, producing natural music during strong gusts. You find the opening, it's moss-covered and narrow, but sure enough, when the wind shifts just right, you hear a low flute-like tone drift through the stone like breath through bone. Legend says the monks called it heaven's laugh. Skeptics say it's just physics. But standing here surrounded by ghost flutes and crumbling scholar halls, you're inclined to believe in the divine giggle of air through rock. Near the edge of the terrace, a broken altar faces the valley. Its stone legs cracked in two, its incense holder blackened with age. Someone's left a tiny offering, a handful of red dates, and a single packet of instant noodles, probably from a hiker or local caretaker. The mix of old and new makes you smile. Even ghosts have midnight cravings. You sit for a while, the wind brushing your cheeks like silk. Down in the valley below, you can just make out the glimmer of a flood control channel snaking its way along the former rice paddies. It's clean and efficient. Lifeless. You wonder what it must have been like when this place buzzed with life footsteps echoing through hallways, flute duets drifting from balconies, debates about the proper timing of ginseng harvesting sparking over midday tea. You can almost see them, their robes fluttering, their laughter tangled with wind. One of the scholars here, so the story goes, once devised a breathing technique so effective his followers claimed he didn't sleep for an entire month. He just reclined and observed the breath. Some say he eventually evaporated into mist. Others say he fell asleep mid-lecture and snored so loudly it cracked a lantern. Either way, no records show what became of him. It's starting to get dark now. The pine shadows grow longer. The flutes have fallen silent. As you prepare to leave, you take one last look at the temple school's gate. Above it, half broken but still legible, hangs a wooden plaque that reads, "The longer the silence, the deeper the root." You step back onto the trail, the trees closing behind you like a soft exhale. No rushing water this time. No dragon-sprung leaks. Just the quiet breath of an old cliff village slowly turning into forest again. You begin to descend once more, following a stony path lined with moss and memory. The next village waits half submerged in a different kind of sleep. But for now, you carry one shoe with you, a bit of wind, a forgotten tune, and a coin's worth of silence pressed deep in your pocket. The slope curves downward now, but your steps remain slow and steady. The terrain is softer here, less rock, more earth, and the kind of damp underfoot that tells you water has ruled this land for centuries. The wind from one shoe fades behind you, replaced by the low croaking of frogs and the occasional drip, drip, drip of something unseen. You descend into a basin flanked by terraced hills. Once these carved steps held rows of rice paddies bright green in spring and golden in harvest. Now the terraces are submerged. The water stretches out ahead in an oddly perfect oval flat and mirror like a glassy eye in the heart of the hills. You've reached the site of Xinglong, a Hakka village that until the early 2000s was home to a few dozen families and a unique circular fortress called a Tulu. If you've never seen one, imagine a thick mud brick UFO crashed into a field and decided to become cozy round massive with only one entrance and no windows on the lower level. Perfect for defense. Even better for community gossip. Tonight's mainstream historical fact, Tulu architecture is an iconic legacy of the Hakka people, an ethnic subgroup in China known for their migration across the southern provinces. These circular or square communal buildings built from the 12th century onwards weren't just homes, they were entire miniature villages, often housing up to 800 people under one giant roof. Xinglong's Tulu was smaller than most, but lovingly maintained. Locals called it the tea drum, both for its shape and for the nightly habit of playing a clay drum during evening meals. You can almost hear it now, dull and rhythmic, keeping time for bowls of rice and passing plates of pickled mustard greens. Then came the reservoir. The government offered compensation, of course, but money doesn't patch over memory. The elders fought it. Some even camped inside the Tulu until the floodwaters were already lapping at its base. Eventually, they left. Most did, but not all. And here's the scholarly mystery. Historians still argue whether Xinglong's Tulu was moved or submerged. Official reports claim it was relocated brick by brick to a museum site in Fujian province. Yet satellite images from drought years seem to show a circular outline just beneath the surface of the reservoir, perfectly matching the Tulu's original footprint. Local divers say it's still there, intact, silent, waiting. You walk along a boardwalk, now half wooden, half concrete, built for tourists who never came. The air smells faintly of fish and decaying algae. And then there it is. Just below the water surface, the top rim of a circular wall, thick and beige like the crust of a bread loaf rising from soup. You stare. A carp jumps and breaks the surface. Ripples distort the shape, and for a moment it disappears completely. Then slowly it returns like something resurfacing from a dream. You step off the boardwalk onto a muddy path and follow it toward what would have been the Tulu's entrance. There's no doorway now, just water. But some stones still rise above the surface enough to sit on. You take a seat. Your legs dangle over water that hides 100 bedrooms, 100 kitchens, 100 quiet memories. Here's a fringe tidbit to stir the pot. In the final weeks before Xinglong's submersion, villagers claimed to hear strange music coming from inside the Tulu at night when no one was playing. Some blamed echoes from the dam site. Others thought it was the drum remembering its beat. One elder insisted it was an ancestor's warning. Her house was the last to be dismantled, and her warning, don't build on forgotten voices. No one knows what she meant. But the new housing complex that replaced Xinglong's community centre reportedly had foundation issues within the first year. You rise and walk the shoreline, pausing where small shrines once dotted the slope. Most are gone. A few stone platforms remain half-drowned now, serving as perfect perches for herons. One shrine still bears the faint trace of red paint, a guardian lion teeth bared now, gently cradled by moss. You light a single match, not to burn anything, just to watch the flame, a tribute, a flicker for everything submerged. Further along, you find a series of wooden poles sticking from the mud like ribs. They were once clotheslines. Children used to run between them shrieking with laughter. One end still holds a scrap of fabric, faded red cotton, now grey and threadbare. You tug gently. It doesn't budge. The village is holding on. Village. Something catches your eye, a row of stepping stones just beneath the surface arcing into the centre of the water. You hesitate, then step out. Your boots find each stone easily. The water comes up to your calves, cool and full of silt. You walk toward the Tulu's heart. There, submerged by less than a metre, is the central courtyard platform. You stop. The silence is thick, wrapped around your shoulders like a damp quilt. And then you feel it. Not a voice. Not quite. More like a presence, watchful, curious, but not unkind. The village isn't sad. It's just waiting. Waiting for a return that might never come. You dip your fingers into the water. The surface trembles, then calms. Somewhere deep inside, a door might still swing open. A teapot might still sit on a stone stove. A child's carved flute might still wait on a windowsill. Forgotten, but not gone. You head back, shoes soaked, but heart full. Xinglong has become something else, a quiet chapel beneath the waterline. You don't need to see every beam or bowl to know it lived. Still lives. As you rejoin the main trail, the moon has risen, a pale coin pressed against the navy sky. The reservoir glows in its light. It looks peaceful. It's earned that. And now, as the wind begins to shift again, you turn toward the next path, one that leads to a village whose story wasn't just drowned, but deliberately buried. But that's for the next hill. Tonight, Xinglong drums in your chest, steady and low, and the silence it left behind hums louder than words. The trail veers away from the water's edge, now winding into thicker brush and uneven stone. Your legs are starting to ache, but in that satisfying way that comes from movement without urgency. The trees grow denser, and for a while you're enclosed in a green cocoon. The sound of the reservoir fades, replaced by birdsong, and a breeze whispering through bamboo. Then you see what's left of it anyway. A moss-covered marker rises out of the earth, barely legible. But the characters are there if you squint. Xucheng, Water City. Except, of course, there's no city here now, not above ground. You've reached the edge of Xucheng village, once a bustling node in a network of underground grain storage and cold cellars. An engineering marvel of sorts, but you won't find rooftops or lantern posts here. Xucheng's uniqueness was its vertical design. It spiraled downward. An inverted village dug deep into the stone homes, stacked like layers of sediment. And now it's all submerged under a man-made lake with no surface markers. Unless, of course, you count this half-buried milestone now acting as a gravestone. Your mainstream historical fact. During the early Qing dynasty, several mountain villages in southern China experimented with vertical architecture, not just for space efficiency, but to avoid detection by roving armies or tax collectors. Xucheng became famous for its descent. Dozens of families living in a well-like formation, sharing oxygen shafts, torchlit staircases, and underground ventilation systems that baffled even modern engineers. The fringe twist. Historians still argue whether Xucheng even existed. No official census, no Qing military records, not even a post-revolution survey mentions it by name. Only local stories, a few oral histories passed down in rural dialect, and this stubborn little stone that you're now gently brushing clean with your sleeve. The forest path narrows and you duck beneath low branches. Then ahead, a small shack comes into view, weather-worn but intact. A ranger's post, maybe, but the solar panel on the roof tells you someone's keeping it alive. Inside, there's a stool, a dry kettle, and a dusty topographic map pinned to the wall. Xucheng's lake glistens in blue ink, unlabeled but clearly intentional. Beside it, someone has scrawled in black marker, Sanshi Juko Jijia 39 mouths under one roof. You smile. Someone remembers. You follow a faint side trail from the shack, and before long, it leads to a series of stone steps, uneven, mossy, and descending into nothing. They stop at a flat patch of mud. A clearing you realize that once led to the spiral well of Xucheng. Now, it's a stagnant pool overgrown with reeds and frogs and ghosts. Here's the thing, locals claim that on full moons, you can hear Xucheng still breathing. Not literally, but through a weird acoustic anomaly, whispers rising from the earth like steam. Some say it's just wind through the old air shafts. Others say it's the sound of ancestors still cooking dinner below. One child once told a visiting journalist that he could smell boiled peanuts under the mud. Make of that what you will. You kneel at the edge of the pool, trying not to slip. The water's murky. No signs of stones, no shadows of walls, just reflections of reeds and sky. But if you listen, really listen, you can hear a deep, hollow echo when the wind picks up, like someone clearing their throat beneath the surface. You pull a small stone from your pocket, smooth and flat, and drop it in. The plunk is swallowed instantly. No splash, no ripple. Just gone. You sit back and rest your palms on the earth. The soil here is unusually warm. Geothermal vents, maybe, or a buried heat source. One theory is that Xucheng used an underground clay oven system constantly radiating warmth for both cooking and insulation. If true, then some of that thermal energy could still be humming below. Sleeping kilns. That's the image that sticks. Now your fringe tidbit. An amateur urban explorer in the late 1990s claimed to have descended into one of Xucheng's peripheral shafts during a severe drought. He said he saw shelves carved directly into the stone, still lined with ceramic jars intact and sealed. He took one. Inside, not rice or tea, but handwritten notes, dozens of them tightly folded, pressed flat. The writing was in a script no one could match to modern Mandarin, though it bore similarities to Nushu, an ancient, women-only syllabic script from neighbouring provinces. Unfortunately, the explorer's backpack and the jar were reportedly lost during a typhoon. Or so he claims. Maybe he just didn't want to share. Either way, That story adds another layer of mystery to an already elusive village. You rise and stretch, casting one last glance at the pool. The wind shifts. A soft rustle brushes your ear. Could be a bird, could be bamboo, could be something deeper. You don't dwell on it. Shucheng's gone, but not erased. It lives below in warmth and whispers and jars full of untranslatable words. Back on the main path, the forest begins to thin again. You can smell something different on the air, metallic and dry. That means one thing: the stone quarry ruins are coming. Ahead lies another submerged tale, but this time not of homes and hearths, but of labour and noise and endless hammering. Still, you carry Shuicheng with you. A memory that's downward, not outward. A village without sky, but full of breath. The path becomes rocky now, crunching beneath your shoes, as tiny pebbles skitter off into the underbrush. The trees fall behind like a curtain lifting on a new scene, and you emerge into a clearing that feels loud even in silence. You're standing on the lip of what was once a quarry village, gouged from the belly of a hillside, and long since claimed by water. The landscape is jagged and strange, as if the earth here once tried to grow teeth. Crumbling walls of limestone rise on either side, carved by human hands in crude, stubborn lines. Down below, where workers once toiled, a flooded pit, now glistens a deep blue mirror, unnervingly still. This was Daxian-kun, which roughly translates to Big Immortal Village. Ironically, there's nothing immortal about it. It existed for barely 2 centuries, just long enough to be useful, and then discarded like a broken chisel. But for those who lived here, it was everything. Your mainstream historical fact tonight. During China's Great Leap Forward in the late 1950s, rural villages like Daxian-kun were conscripted into industrial roles, many with no previous experience in mining or metallurgy. Daxian-kun became a stone-cutting hub, supplying limestone blocks for roads, dams, and even Mao-era public buildings hundreds of miles away. Entire families worked the quarry: fathers, sons, mothers, grandmothers. If you could hold a hammer, you had a job. At its peak, over 200 residents lived in stone shacks, built right into the quarry walls, their lives divided between daylight labour and moonlit repair work. The village earned a strange nickname: the Echoing Bowl. Every word bounced back at you. Secrets didn't last long here, and now you hear nothing. Not a bird, not a breeze, just the soft ring of your own breath. You make your way down a slope, the crushed gravel whispering like dry leaves. At the bottom, you find a rusted pulley system, half submerged in the floodwater. Steel cables snake into the depths, taut and silent. A mine shaft, maybe, or an old elevator track. You lean close to inspect it, and a dragonfly buzzes past your ear like a tiny helicopter on a tight deadline. Now, for the quirky bit. During the last years of operation, the workers of Daxian-kun supposedly invented their own whistling language used to communicate across the quarry walls. Sharp bird-like calls that meant things like pull now, or stone slipping, or lunch. A few linguists tried to document it before the village flooded in the 1980s, but only got snippets. No full glossary. Locals say the whistles were based on birdsong, and even claim that the birds began mimicking the workers in return. So if you hear a whistle in the trees around here, well, maybe it's just a warbler. Or maybe it's old Cheng Guo calling for a rope. You step onto a low platform of rock jutting into the water. It was once a loading dock. You can almost picture carts of stone being rolled out, tipped and ferried away by barge. The lake is deceptively clear in places. You can see lengths of rebar sticking up like skeletal fingers, the skeletons of a collapsed scaffolding. But here's the open debate. Historians still argue whether Daxian-kun was truly abandoned or forcibly cleared. Some claim the state relocated villagers peacefully once the quarry lost profitability. Others suggest the flooding was a cover for a tragic accident, a support collapse that took lives and a narrative quickly rewritten to save face. There's even a single photo often shared on fringe message boards, a grainy black and white image of men in Mao suits, standing near a barricade behind them, what looks like a collapsed tunnel entrance. No date, no location stamp, but the terrain behind them is unmistakably Daxian Kun. You recognize the cliffs from where you're standing now. You walk the perimeter, climbing over low walls and ducking beneath what's left of a pulley arm still wedged into a stone outcrop. Your hand grazes the surface. It's rough, sun-bleached, but faintly warm. These tools, these stones, they outlasted the people who wielded them. You find a set of shallow steps leading downward. Not carved stairs, just foot-worn impressions in stone. They descend toward the lake's edge, stopping abruptly beneath the surface. You sit on the lowest dry one and lean forward, and there it is. Just beneath the waterline, a carved stone plaque, letters, barely visible through the algae and muck. You can make out the first two characters, Da Xian Daxian Kun. The rest is lost in shadow and time. You watch small fish dart between the cracks as if spelling out what's missing. Time for one final fringe story. A former worker, now in his 90s, claimed that deep beneath the quarry was an unfinished opera house, carved by bored labourers who missed the cities they'd come from. They supposedly dug out a chamber with perfect acoustics where songs would reverberate like thunder. They called it the Rock Moon Room. No official record of it exists, but divers have reported hearing strange harmonics underwater here, like singing in a vacuum. Science blames shifting water pressure in the stone caverns. Locals blame ghosts. You stand again, brushing quarry dust from your clothes. It's everywhere fine pale, a powder that clings. You wonder how many generations breathed this in. How many words were whispered, whistled, or lost to the echoing bowl. Climbing back to the ridge, you glance one last time at the water. It's still. Too still. A hammer tap might set it ringing like a gong. Instead, you let silence settle. And now, with stone and steel behind you, your path turns once more. The trail begins to rise, not steep, but persistent, curling toward a region where an entire county was redrawn beneath water. Whole town streets, even temples vanished. But for now, you walk in the hush of stonecutters' dreams, in the shadow of echoes that never quite fade. The incline sharpens slightly, and your calves grumble in protest, but your mind stays fixed on what's ahead. Trees begin to thin, replaced by tall grass, waving like sleepy spectators. The ground underfoot changes too, less rocky, more packed clay. You're nearing the heart of the flooded prefecture, a place once dense with map schools and post offices. Now it's just memory and water. You crest a rise, and suddenly the view opens before you. A vast lake stretches to the horizon, perfectly still, reflecting the afternoon sky with glassy defiance. You pause, winded by both the climb and the scale of it. This isn't a village lost to a riverbank or an accidental reservoir. This is a district buried deliberately, its history flattened beneath logistics and hydroelectric ambition. You're looking out at the remains of Yong'an County, once home to thousands merchants, scholars, farmers, monks, now submerged beneath an artificial lake built in the 1970s as part of a controversial water management project. Above you, blue skies. Below that still mirror, entire neighborhoods. Your mainstream history beat here. When the Yong'an Flood Diversion Project was launched, it was hailed as a marvel of engineering. It would protect downstream areas from monsoon floods, generate electricity, and open up new trade routes. The price for townships, nearly 60 villages, and dozens of ancestral temples intentionally flooded with minimal documentation. Families were given weeks to relocate, and anything left behind was swallowed. Some say it was necessary, others say it was brutal efficiency politics wielding water like a sword. You walk along the lakeshore now, your shoes crunching against broken porcelain. Shards of blue and white china litter the area, remnants of grave offerings perhaps. Or just kitchenware that didn't make the boat in time. And here's the quirky detail. This lake, massive as it is, has a nickname: Mirror of the Lost Names. That's because satellite imaging sometimes reveals ghost patterns beneath the surface. Roads, roof lines, once even a courtyard wall traced perfectly by sediment and algae. Pilots flying overhead have reported glimpses of entire town blocks visible just after a rain when water clarity peaks. Cartographers joke that it's the most mapped, unmappable place in China, but maps can't hold memory like people can. That's why every spring, the relocated descendants of Yong'an gather at the water's edge. Not to mourn, but to picnic. They float paper boats bearing the names of their grandparents, each lit with a single candle. When the wind is calm, the entire lake glows like a field of stars. You stop to rest beneath a crooked pine, watching the water shift. It's unnerving how quiet it is. The lake has no tide, no noticeable current. Just slow breathing like something waiting below. Now for the scholarly friction, historians still argue whether the main temple of Yong'an was ever really submerged. Some believe it was carefully dismantled and relocated before the water arrived. Others claim it's still there, whole and intact, beneath 30 meters of lake. According to regional legend, the temple's guardian statue, a jade-eyed lion, still watches from the bottom eyes, glowing faintly, when moonlight hits the lake just right. A popular conspiracy video once claimed to show drone footage of the lion's head just beneath the surface. The footage went viral for a while, until a professor pointed out that the lion was likely an eroded boulder shaped by sediment flow. Still, that hasn't stopped people from kayaking out at night hoping for a glimpse of glowing green eyes. You continue walking, finding a small jetty made from crumbling bricks, probably once a street corner, now masquerading as lakeside architecture. You sit legs dangling over the water and close your eyes. For a moment, you try to imagine the town as it was. The clang of a blacksmith in the alley, children splashing at a well, a woman shouting prices at the morning market, a temple bell calling for evening prayer. Then the ground shakes, the dam opens, the water arrives, and just like that, it's gone. Open your eyes. The lake is still there, but now you notice something odd. Beneath the jetty, a line of carved stone, delicate latticework. A corner of what used to be a second-story balcony, now just barely visible when the light hits at an angle. Your breath catches. It's like seeing a ghost peek from behind a curtain. This is your fringe detail. In the early 2000s, a drought dropped the waterline by 10 meters. For 2 weeks, Yong'an's old clock tower emerged, its top floors poking above the lake like a raised hand. Curious locals rode out and found it still sturdy, the clock face still bearing faint gold numbers. No hands, of course. Time stopped the moment the town disappeared. The government quickly sealed the area and reflooded it as rains returned. The clock has never reappeared. You run your fingers along the stone under the jetty. It's smooth, worked, deliberate. Someone once painted it, you think maybe red or yellow, but now it's just lake-washed stone, eroded by 40 years of quiet. A distant horn echoes across the lake, probably a cargo boat, or maybe just an old sound replaying itself. You stand and stretch again, bones popping like tired popcorn. You've walked through vanished quarries, spiral villages, underwater libraries. Now here at the edge of a drowned county, you can't help but feel the weight of it. How little of history is physical? How much is smell, silent sediment? The wind picks up slightly, brushing ripples across the lake's face. In those ripples, you think you see patterns again, lines, grids, a flicker of window pane. But maybe that's just your sleepy brain getting poetic. Or maybe Yong'an isn't done telling its story. The trail bends inland now, away from the lake and back towards shaded forest. You walk on, leaving the water behind. But its hush follows you like a lullaby hummed through the soles of your feet. Next comes a tale more recent of a modern ghost town swallowed by accident, where digital plans clashed with analog terrain and the earth decided to fight back. But for now, you walk beneath leaning trees and whispering leaves with lake water still clinging to your socks. The forest closes around you again, this time with an almost conspiratorial hush. The air grows damp and peaty, rich with the smell of rotting bark and wet stone. If the last section was about the grandeur of lost prefectures and glimmering lake beds, this stretch is about something stranger, a modern ghost town barely a generation old now, half submerged and already forgotten. You push through a curtain of ivy hanging like theatre drapery, and there it is, a narrow road cracked in 3 places, moss bleeding from the splits like something alive. To your left, part of a guardrail still clings to relevance. To your right, buildings, real recent buildings, concrete, rebar, not the ancient stones of dynasties past, but the skeletons of an ambitious housing project, now marooned in a shallow accidental lake. This was supposed to be Xinhei New Village, meant to house over 10,000 people with supermarket schools, even a tiny cinema. It was part of a government relocation plan in the late 1990s, designed to bring rural communities into modern living standards. Problem was, no one double-checked the hydrology reports. Within 2 years of construction, the water table shifted. Cracks formed. Foundations buckled. Then the seasonal rains came, and the whole valley basin turned into a concrete bathtub. Your mainstream historical note, Xinhei, wasn't the only one. Between 1995 and 2005, China saw over 120 ghost towns emerge due to planning oversights, land corruption, and the mad scramble for rapid development. Most were bulldozed or retrofitted, but a few like this one were left to drown. The water here isn't deep no more than waist height in most places, but it's enough to ruin everything. You step carefully onto the main avenue, the shallow water sucking at your boots. Faded white lines still divide the street. Beneath the surface, weeds sway like they're whispering secrets to passing ghosts. You pass an apartment block, 4 stories of brutalist geometry, now stained green with algae. Broken windows stare out like blind eyes. You peek inside one of the lower rooms. It still has a rusted bed frame, and weirdly a half-inflated beach ball. Someone brought a sense of optimism, at least, and here's your quirky nugget. Some of the first residents, before they were forced to evacuate, had already begun forming a mini fishing community within the flooded alleyways. One man reportedly raised ducks in his hallway using floating crates and leftover construction foam. For a while, Xinhei was both a failed development and a floating village. Locals joked they were China's first urban amphibians. You wade further in passing a half-submerged street sign. The characters are barely legible, but they once read Prosperity Lane. That didn't age well. Now for the scholarly scuffle, urban planners and historians still debate whether Xinhei should be preserved as a cautionary tale or erased altogether. Some argue it's a symbol of hubris, a monument to what happens when speed overtakes caution. Others say it's not significant enough, just another abandoned project barely worth a footnote. One architecture professor has been lobbying to preserve it as a museum of non-places, a place that never truly was. He even proposed guided canoe tours through the flooded basements with interpretive signs explaining each failed blueprint. The idea was predictably denied funding. You round a corner and find an old supermarket, the faded red and white signage now hanging sideways. Inside, metal shelves have rusted into abstract sculpture. An empty instant noodle box floats lazily near the doorway, preserved by time and irony. You push open the broken glass door, water sloshes as you move. Inside, the silence is suffocating. The ceiling drips occasionally, a slow, rhythmic beat. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks like it's clearing its throat before delivering a TED talk. You crouch behind a checkout counter, the kind once plastered with candy and impulse buy lighters. Now it's just mold. Here's your fringe tale locals claim that on foggy nights when the valley floods even higher, you can still hear the ding of a service bell and the quiet voice of a cashier asking if you have exact change. One viral story described a traveller who swore he saw a faint blue flicker from one of the apartment windows, an old CRT television playing what looked like a 1998 soap opera. When he returned the next day, the building was locked dry and empty. You climb the stairs of the supermarket to a mezzanine level, stepping over broken tiles. From this height, you can look out over the whole development. There's the community centre, the water treatment building, the kindergarten, its cartoon murals now smeared by mould and time. You imagine what it would have looked like had the project succeeded. balconies hung with laundry scooter engines, buzzing kids chasing each other around corner stores. Instead, you get this. A sunken dream, half-built and wholly broken. But it's oddly peaceful too. No traffic, no construction noise, just water and wind and the occasional startled bird. If cities had ghost cousins, this would be one. You make your way out again, retracing your steps past Prosperity Lane. The name glints faintly in the waning sunlight. You pass the rubbery remains of an old basketball. Someone must have played here once before the court turned into a marsh. Back on dry land, you peel off your wet socks and sit on a toppled bench, letting your feet dry in the breeze. You glance back one last time. The buildings look like ships now partially sunken and oddly elegant in their decay. It's easy to mock places like Xinhe, but harder to admit how many people believed in it. Drew maps of their new homes, hung up calendars, dreamed. In the end, it's not just the buildings that were drowned, it's the optimism too. And that's always harder to rebuild. You rise again, the day stretching longer, now shadows getting cooler. Ahead lies an older village, this one intentionally buried, but still used in sacred rituals. A place where the line between the living and the drowned blurs, in ways that even skeptics find hard to explain. But first, you shake off the water slapper mosquito off your arm and chuckle quietly. You just walked through a real estate failure turned into a swamp. If that doesn't deserve a nap, what does? Your path narrows again, curling through low brush and thickets that tug gently at your sleeves like curious fingers. The air smells of stone and moss, with just a hint of incense so faint you wonder if you're imagining it. The forest thins, and through the tangled branches, you glimpse the roof line of a temple, its upturned eaves rising just above the surface of a pale green pool. You've reached Liuan village, a place swallowed not entirely by mistake, but by ritual. This isn't like the drowned districts or accidental ghost towns you've seen. No Liuan is different. It was flooded deliberately, but not forgotten. In fact, it's still visited, worshipped and mourned by those whose ancestors once walked its winding streets. The water is considered sacred now, a vessel of memory, not a barrier to it. The mainstream historical point here is this. Back in the early 1950s, when China began constructing a series of mid-scale dams to help manage water flow in Anhui province Liuan, was marked for controlled submersion. Engineers and officials met with villagers mapping out relocation plans, but the locals made one request, one non-negotiable condition. They asked for their ancestral temple, the Temple of the Nine Spirits, to remain exactly where it was. They didn't want it moved, dismantled, or rebuilt on higher ground. Why? Because the temple wasn't just stone and wood. It was believed to be a gate between the worlds, anchored by 9 spirit statues representing the elements, family lines, and river deities. In a surprising twist of bureaucracy meeting mysticism, the engineers agreed, sort of. The temple would be sealed, but preserved, and when the water rose, it would become submerged, like a submerged reliquary. Now, the upper tiers of the temple's roof still peek above the surface like a sentinel keeping watch. You step closer to the pool's edge. The water is startlingly clear. Peering down, you can just make out the outlines of the temple's second floor, draped in riverweed, glinting with mineral buildup like underwater armor. The tiles are dark green, trimmed in bronze, now dulled to a matte patina by the decades. Here's your quirky side detail. Every spring during the Ghost Festival, locals arrive by boat, tying silk threads from the roof eaves to tiny floating lanterns. These threads act as spiritual bridges, they say, helping the spirits come up for one night to be honored, fed, and sung to. It's one of the few places in China where a sunken site is still part of active spiritual practice, a strange but beautiful compromise between loss and continuity. You move along the bank, passing a row of stone markers, grave posts likely moved here after the flooding. Many bear inscriptions so weathered they look like braille for fish. Offerings sit nearby, fruit incense cones, even a cracked cassette player. You squint at the label Teresa Teng. Someone hoped the spirits were fans of ballads. And now, a debate for dessert scholars still argue whether the Temple of the Nine Spirits was actually the site of pre-Buddhist ritual practices older than any written records. Some say the village's tales about river gods and ancestor channeling rituals suggest a proto-Taoist lineage masked in later dynastic architecture. Others think it's all modern mythology created after the flooding to make peace with loss. You cross a short, half-submerged stone bridge. Your boots crunch as you pass over algae-slick cobblestones, remnants of the original main street. On either side, shadowy outlines of stone foundations linger just beneath the surface. You spot what looks like an upside-down wooden stool resting gently among reeds, as if waiting for someone to come sit. A little further on, you find a raised platform dry and cracked, a good spot to rest. From here, you can see the water ripple slightly with wind casting shifting shadows over the submerged tiles. For a moment, everything looks alive, not ruined, not forgotten, just suspended. Here's a fringe bit for your tired brain. In 1994, a documentary crew attempted to lower a camera into the depths of the temple using a basic submersible. Footage revealed that the 9 spirit statues were still intact, though slightly tilted from silt pressure. One of the statues, representing wind, had developed a slow leak of air bubbles from its mouth. The crew joked that it was trying to talk. When they returned a week later, the leak had stopped. The statue had shifted, but no divers had entered the temple in between. Locals weren't surprised. The spirits move when they wish, an elder said. We just float above them like leaves on the river. You stay seated a while longer, letting the stillness do its work. Around you, the reeds sway the air, buzzes with lazy insects, and the water makes soft lapping sounds against the stones. It doesn't feel eerie, just respectful. Like the land is whispering old prayers back to itself. It's getting late now. The light softens, and shadows stretch long across the temple pond. You rise and walk slowly around the curve of the water, past more stone markers and offerings. A few birds call out from the trees above, their cries brief and questioning. As you re-enter the forest path, you glance back one more time. The temple roof catches the last of the daylight shimmering faintly, almost like a candle in the distance. You wonder how many other places like this exist. Sacred sites submerged not out of accident or apathy, but reverence. You keep moving, heading toward higher ground now. The terrain turns rocky again, the trees more sparse. Your next destination lies just beyond the ridge, a place where an entire Bronze Age village vanished beneath a mudslide, triggered by an overfilled reservoir. A more violent loss. But first, this quiet, glassy memory of Liuan follows you like an echo. You whisper a soft goodbye to the temple. Not that it needs it. It probably already heard you coming hours ago. The path hardens under your feet, stone, turning jagged, the gentle hum of frogs and reeds, replaced by the occasional rumble of falling gravel. There's tension here. You feel it in the brittle silence, in the sharp wind that snakes through narrow ravines. You're climbing toward a place where the earth itself once gave way, where a village wasn't gently submerged by rising waters, but violently erased by its own reservoir. You crest the ridge, panting just a little. Blame the altitude, not the snack breaks, and there it is, the mud-streaked basin of what was once Yingxing village. Now it's a dry, hushed crater. No visible buildings, no standing water. Just a fractured valley floor, dusted in grey silt like a scar that never really healed. Here's your historical foundation. Yingxing was an ancient Bronze Age settlement, its archaeological footprint dating back over 3,000 years. Excavations in the 1970s uncovered pottery shards, ritual urns, and early metallurgy tools. The site was deemed historically significant, but construction of a nearby reservoir moved ahead anyway in the early 1980s, intended to support irrigation and hydroelectric power in the region. The dam held for nearly 2 decades, until a season of relentless rain in 2003 changed everything. The engineers had to release pressure. They warned the nearby towns. But Yingxing, low in the valley, mostly rural, mostly forgotten, got little more than a radio broadcast and a prayer. When the floodgate opened, the wave hit a previously weakened slope of earth and sent an entire hillside roaring down in a midnight landslide. The village was buried, not drowned, consumed by mud boulders and runoff, with almost nothing left behind. You pick your way down carefully, boots crunching on cracked clay and scattered rock. No signs of life, now just wind patterns etched in dust, and a few twisted remains of irrigation pipes, half exposed like rusted veins in the skin of the mountain. You reach what used to be the village centre. There's a stone foundation still visible, an outline of a square building, maybe a granary or communal hall. You kneel to brush away some dirt and find a fragment of porcelain surprisingly intact. Its glaze is delicate, soft blue, patterned with looping tendrils. You imagine someone holding it in their hands, maybe laughing over tea, unaware of the hillside above them, getting ready to pounce. For your quirky detail, locals claim the flood wasn't just a natural consequence. They believe the village was cursed by the ghost of an exiled scholar, one who lived here centuries earlier and was executed by drowning in a nearby river after angering a regional warlord. According to the tale, his spirit travelled through stone and waited silently until Yingxing's fate matched his own. The tale's a little dramatic, but it stayed alive in bedtime warnings and embroidered talismans tucked into children's clothes. A good curse, after all, doesn't need proof, just timing. You climb a short ridge to a lookout point once used by farmers to monitor seasonal floodwaters. Now the reservoir is far in the distance, shimmering blue-grey under a heavy sky. You can see the dam wall, a hard black line cutting across the water like a frown. It's larger now, reinforced, after the 2003 disaster. New warning systems are in place, evacuation drills are held. But you still wonder, what if it happens again? Now for the scholarly debate, was Yingxing avoidable? Some historians say yes, pointing to the reservoir's flawed design and rushed timeline. Records show at least 2 engineers raised concerns about the slope's stability long before the collapse. Others argue no, the land had been eroding for centuries, and no amount of planning could have predicted that year's unprecedented rainfall. As usual, the truth probably lives somewhere in the grey, buried under layers of bureaucratic denial and soggy paperwork. You sit on a fallen tree trunk, the bark, long gone, polished smooth by weather. It feels strange to rest here on top of lost stories, flattened rooms, broken heirlooms. But it also feels necessary. You're not just walking through time, you're walking over it. And here's your fringe nugget. In 2011, a team of drone archaeologists conducted a topographic scan of the Yingxing Basin and discovered something odd. A series of rectangular shapes under the mud, too regular to be natural. Some suggest they're the remains of a second, older settlement, possibly a ritual site linked to the Bronze Age people who once lived here. Others think it's just water damage playing architectural tricks on the soil. Still, a few believe the older Yingxing was intentionally built in the valley because of its supposed spiritual resonance, that the villagers always lived with the quiet expectation that one day the mountain would reclaim them. You start to walk again, skirting the edge of a broken path. A faded milestone juts up through the dirt, its characters half visible, half eaten by time. It once marked the road to the next village, Shuiko, another ancient riverside community that voluntarily relocated in the 1970s to avoid flooding. In the process, the villagers left behind a perfectly preserved stone courtyard, now underwater, but still visited annually by descendants for tea ceremonies. That's where you're headed next. But here in this dry ruin of Yingxing, you pause once more. The wind picks up, and dust coils through the air. You swear you hear something, a soft clinking sound, like a spoon in a teacup. Maybe just your imagination. Maybe something deeper echoing through the silt. Before you leave, you set the porcelain shard carefully back where you found it. A small gesture of respect. Then you climb out of the basin step by step, leaving the buried village behind. You whisper a quiet wish as you go. That whoever once lived here, laughed here, cried here, still echoes somewhere, still remembered. Not just in data sheets or damage reports, but in quiet stories like this one. In footsteps like yours. The ridge path evens out now, and your steps begin to feel lighter. Not because the terrain is easier though, it is, but because your mind lifts just slightly from the weight of Yingxing's buried silence. You're walking towards something different. Not devastation, not ruin, but a village that chose to leave with dignity before the water arrived. You pass through a narrow gap between two cliffs where wind whistles like a bamboo flute, and then you see it, the placid sheet of the reservoir stretching out below. Wide and unbroken, and nestled on its edge, the new version of Shuiku village built just uphill from where its predecessor once stood. Behind it, submerged in silence, lies the old Shuiku, its courtyard still intact beneath the water, like a porcelain plate resting on the bottom of a glass bowl. You follow a winding trail that leads down toward the water. A few wooden signs have been posted here by descendants. No loud plaques, no tourist slogans. Just a single line carved into the wood. We remember what lies below. Mainstream history first. Shuiku was an old riverside trading town with documented records going back to the late Song dynasty. For centuries, it served as a stopover point for barge traders, grain merchants, and itinerant monks. Its stone-paved main street, lined with elm trees and tea stalls, was said to remain cool even in summer. By the 1950s, it had become quiet, but not forgotten, just aging gracefully. Then came the warning the reservoir project would raise water levels across several provinces. Shuiku was in the red zone. The villagers had a choice: wait, protest, or move. Unlike so many others, they chose to leave on their own terms. A rare case of consensus, driven perhaps by the elders, who believed in adaptation over resistance. In 1974, Shuiku's residents packed up, blessed their homes, and relocated uphill. Their new village kept the same name, the same layout, and even reused stone blocks from the original foundations. But one thing they left behind on purpose was the village's central courtyard. Why? Because it was considered sacred ground. The courtyard had hosted weddings, solstice ceremonies, and ancestor feasts for generations. To uproot it felt wrong, so they left it in place and designed a ritual around it. You reach the shoreline now. The water is shallow here, clear enough to glimpse dark outlines below squares of stone, soft spirals of stairs, even what looks like a fallen bench. Every year on the day of the Dragon Boat Festival, villagers row out to the courtyard, dropping flower petals and tea leaves on the surface above it. They call it tea for the deep table, a floating meal, a conversation across time. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some elders say that on particularly quiet mornings, if you press your ear close to the water's edge, you can hear the courtyard bell ringing. This was a real bell, mind you, once mounted on a pole in the centre of the square. Supposedly it sank with the stones but never stopped chiming. Some blame underwater acoustics, others claim the ancestors are answering back. You sit by the water's edge watching a dragonfly skim the surface. The air smells of damp stone with a faint trace of camphor. Behind you, the new Shuiku bustles quietly, laughter from a courtyard garden, the soft thud of a mortar pounding herbs, a child calling to someone in the distance. Here comes the debate. Historians still argue whether Shuiku's decision to relocate peacefully was truly voluntary or subtly coerced. Some believe the town leaders were pressured with promises of compensation, which later fell short. Others insist the village had been considering relocation even before the dam project, citing aging infrastructure and frequent flooding. The truth likely balances between choice and circumstance. Rarely is history a clean line, but for all its ambiguity, Shuiku's memory ritual is real and elegant. The way the villagers transformed potential loss into a lasting act of remembrance feels sophisticated, practical, a kind of emotional feng shui. Leave the heavy part behind, keep it sacred, then build anew. You stand and stretch your eyes, scanning the water. Somewhere beneath it lies a stone bench where couples once sat, a fountain where children splashed, a lantern hook that never got taken down. You wonder what it would feel like to dive down to sit on the cool stones of the sunken courtyard and look up at the rippling ceiling of the lake. Now, for the fringe theory in 2019, a diver and amateur historian named Zi Min took a private plunge during the dry season when water levels were unusually low. What he claimed to find, though never proven, was that the courtyard had shifted slightly, its alignment no longer perfectly squared. He believed it moved in response to lunar cycles like the tide. It's breathing, he wrote in his journal, like it's still living. Scholars dismiss the claim as poetic nonsense, but some folklorists keep his notes in their files just in case. The sun starts to lower now, casting long gold ribbons across the lake. Shadows stretch over the new Shuiku, and the cicadas begin their slow song. You walk uphill back through the winding path, past gnarled trees and humming wires. The newer homes are simple but well kept. Painted wood, carved lattice windows, plum trees blooming. At the top of the hill, you reach a small pavilion. Someone has set out an offering plate, steamed buns, a thermos of jasmine tea, and a folded piece of paper with calligraphy. You don't open it. Some letters aren't meant to be read by anyone but the water. You sit, and for a moment, all you hear is the lake breathing below, the faint thrum of distant prayer wheels, and the breeze moving through the cedar leaves like silk on tile. One more journey lies ahead, a final ghostly fishing village, where the river carved away not just buildings, but the town's name itself. But for now, Shuiku cradles you in its quiet dignity. Loss doesn't always mean abandonment. Sometimes it means choosing how you're remembered. Downriver, you follow the bend of the reservoir as it narrows into a channel, then a stream, then something smaller still. The air is wetter here, cooler, shaded by tight-knit pines that lean toward the water as if eavesdropping. There's no official path anymore, just a suggestion of one half swallowed by moss and time. You're headed to the place locals whisper about but never visit. Not because it's dangerous, it's not, at least not now, but because no one is quite sure it ever existed at all. A village that's not on maps, not in state records, and this part's the kicker, not even consistent in name. Some call it Chenjiawan, others Qingshui. A few old fishermen mutter something that sounds like Maowu, which means no name. What is clear is this a settlement once stood here, and it no longer does. The last traces of it vanished beneath a redirected river current sometime in the early 1960s as part of a low-level hydro rerouting project that was never fully disclosed to the public. Not as grand as the Three Gorges, or ambitious as the Yellow River diversions. Just a quiet twist in the stream meant to improve flow toward newer irrigation zones. You reach the water's edge. It's strangely calm here, thick with lily pads, but beneath the surface the current tugs with gentle insistence. You crouch, dip your fingers into the cold stream, and feel it, the invisible force that reshaped everything. Mainstream history here is threadbare. All that's reliably known is that a small fishing community lived at this bend, known for its unusually fine silk nets, woven with techniques not used anywhere else in the region. A single regional archive from 1952 references a net village praised for feeding 5 towns with carp and silver perch. But the name isn't consistent, the population isn't listed, and after 1964, nothing except stories. Your quirky detail is this travellers who pass through the woods here, mostly hikers and stubborn bird watchers, sometimes report seeing lights under the water at dusk. Not lanterns, not reflections, but steady glows in patterns, circles sometimes a grid. One boy said he saw a full chessboard glowing beneath the surface. No one believed him. Except his grandmother, who calmly replied, that was the town square. They used to play every evening. You wander along the bank until you spot them, a row of submerged stakes barely poking above the surface like rotten teeth. Likely mooring poles. A ghost dock. As you stare, the water ripples, and for a moment, just a blink, you swear you see the outline of a house beneath the weeds. Sloped roof, shuttered window, gone again. Scholars still argue whether the village was ever officially recognized. Some claim it was a seasonal camp, temporary unregistered. Others argue that it was a legacy settlement descended from a 9th century fishing clan that purposely avoided registration to sidestep taxation. A few fringe theorists believe the villagers lived entirely underwater, not as mer people sorry no gills, but in stilt homes anchored beneath the floodline, emerging only to trade or drift silently by, with goods wrapped in oilcloth. You find the only above-ground marker left a shrine tree. It's a thin, crooked cedar with dozens of fabric strips tied to its branches, red, yellow, and sun-bleached white. Wishes. Prayers. Some are newer than others. One in faded marker reads, "To whoever's still down there we didn't forget." The wind tugs gently at the ribbons, and you sit beside the tree, letting the breeze pass through your fingers. It smells like river mist and worn-out dreams. Now, for your fringe fact, in 2017, a university diving club sought permission to search the channel for evidence of the nameless village. They were denied, no reason given. But rumour has it that one of the divers went in anyway, just a solo dip at night. No cameras, just a headlamp. He came back pale, shivering, and would only say this: "I found a window." And something was looking back. Creepy, sure. But hey, this is bedtime, not documentary hour. Let's leave a little mystery in the mud, shall we? As the sun dips behind the treetops, the entire river takes on a liquid gold shimmer. You lean back, arms folded behind your head, and stare at the moving sky reflected in the water. Somewhere beneath it lie abandoned nets, sunken chairs, a crooked dock, maybe even that chessboard. The current doesn't forget. It just flows. You feel the weight of the day now, not just in your legs, but in your thoughts. All these lost places. Some erased by ambition, others drowned by neglect. Some, like this one, vanished so quietly they became rumour. But what binds them is not just tragedy. It's the trace they left behind. A broken tile, a sunken stair, a name passed down in whispers. That's what history really is, isn't it? Not facts etched in stone, but stories floated downstream. The breeze softens, the frogs start up again, and the river keeps moving, always moving. You get up slowly, brush the dust from your palms, and take one last look over the water. And now, it's time to drift. You've come a long way tonight, across misty hills, crumbling stone, and the soft hush of deep water. You've stood where old fires once crackled, where bells used to ring, and where laughter echoed beneath curved rooftops. Some of those places are still remembered, drawn in ink, preserved in ceremony. Others, barely traceable now, like shadows under glass. But all of them lived. People walked those paths, wore out those steps, whispered goodnight from those doorways. Their echoes stretch across centuries, and tonight you followed them. So now let your breath settle. Let your shoulders soften. There's no rush. The world outside can wait. For now, you're part of that same quiet stream, drifting gently, unhurried, safe. Let your thoughts move like water fluid, weightless, gliding over smooth stones of memory and soft banks of dreams. If one rises up a forgotten street, a sunken house, a bell ringing underwater, let it float past. Let it fade. You don't have to hold on to it. Just let it carry you. You're safe here in this space between stories. Wrapped in twilight, rocked by quiet, held by time. Sleep is close now. You can feel it pooling around your thoughts, slow and warm. Close your eyes when you're ready. And remember, even places that vanish beneath the waves still leave ripples in the world. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.